Chapter 5 of Jimbo. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Jimbo by Algernon Blackwood. Read by Adrian Pretzelis. Chapter 5. Into the Empty House. The darkness lasted a long time without a break, and when it lifted all recollection of the bedroom scene had vanished. Jimbo found himself back again on the grass. The swinging gate was just in front of him, but he did not recognize it. No suggestion of express trains came back to him as his eyes rested without remembrance upon the bars where he had so often swung, in defiance of orders, with his brothers and sisters. Recollection of his home, family, and previous life he had absolutely none, or at least it was buried so deeply in his inner consciousness that it amounted to the same thing, and he looked out upon the garden, the gate, and the field beyond as upon an entirely new piece of the world. The stars he saw were nearly all gone, and a very faint light was beginning to spread from the woods beyond the field. The eastern horizon was slowly brightening, and soon the night would be gone. Jimbo was glad of this. He began to be conscious of little thrills of expectation, for with the light surely help would also come. The light always brought relief, and he already felt that strange excitement that comes with the first signs of dawn. In the distance cocks were crowing, horses began to stamp in the barns not far away, and 100 little stirrings of life ran over the surface of the earth as the light crept slowly up the sky and dropped down again upon the world with its message of coming day. Of course help would come by the time the sun was really up, and it was partly this certainty, and partly because he was a little too dazed to realize the seriousness of the situation, that prevented his giving way to a fit of fear and weeping. Yet a feeling of vague terror lay only a little way below the surface, and when, a few moments later, he saw that he was no longer alone, and that an odd-looking figure was creeping towards him from the shrubberies, he sprang to his feet, prepared to run unless it at once showed the most friendly intentions. The figure seemed to have come from nowhere. Apparently it had risen out of the earth. It was too large to have been concealed by the low shrubberies, yet he had not been aware of its approach, and it had come without making any noise. Probably it was friendly, he felt, in spite of its curious shape and the stealthy way it had come. At least he hoped so. And if he could only have told whether it was a man or an animal, he would easily have made up his mind. But the uncertain light and the way it crouched, half hidden behind the bushes, prevented this. So he stood, poised ready to run, and yet waiting, hoping, indeed expecting every minute a sign of friendliness and help. In this way the two faced each other silently for some time, until the feeling of terror gradually stole deeper into the boy's heart and began to rob him of full power over his muscles. He wondered if he would be able to run when the time came, and whether he could run fast enough. This was how it first showed itself, this suggestion of insidious fear. Would he be able to keep up the start he had? Would it chase him? Would it run like a man, or like an animal on 4 legs, or on 2? He wished he could see more clearly what it was. He still stood his ground, pluckily, facing it and waiting, but the fear, once admitted to his mind, was gaining strength, and he began to feel cold and shivery. Then, suddenly, the tension came to an end. In 2 strides the figure came up close to his side, and the same second Jimbo was lifted off his feet and borne swiftly away across the field. He felt quite unable to offer the least resistance, and at the same time he felt a sort of relief that something had happened at last. He was still not sure that the figure was unkind. Only its shape filled him with a feeling that was certainly the beginning of a real horror. It was in the shape of a man, he thought, but of a very large and ill-constructed man, for it certainly had moved on 2 legs and had caught him up in a pair of tremendously strong arms. But there was something else it had besides arms, for a kind of soft cloak hung all around it and wrapped the boy from head to foot, preventing him seeing his captor properly, and at the same time filling his body with a kind of warm drowsiness that mitigated his active fear, and made him rather like the sensation of being carried along so easily and so fast. But was he being carried? The pace they were going was amazing, and he moved as easily as a sailing boat and with the same swinging motion. Could it be some animal like a horse after all? Jimbo tried to see more, but found it impossible to free himself from the folds of the enveloping substance, and meanwhile they were swinging forward at what seemed a tremendous pace over fields and ditches, through hedges and down long lanes. The odours of earth and dew-drenched grass and opening flowers came to him. He heard the birds singing, and felt the cool morning air sting his cheeks as they raced along. There was no jolting or jarring, and the figure seemed to cover the ground as lightly as though it hardly touched the earth. It was certainly not a dream, he was sure of that, but the longer they went on, the drowsier he became, and the less he wondered whether the figure was going to help him or to do something dreadful to him. He was now thoroughly afraid, and yet, strange contradiction, he didn't care a bit. Let the figure do what it liked. It was only a sort of nightmare person after all, and might vanish as suddenly as it had arrived. For a long time they dashed forward at this great speed, and then with a bump and a crash they stopped suddenly short, and Jimbo found himself let down upon the solid earth. He tried to free himself at once from the folds of the clinging substance that enveloped him, but before he could do so and see what his captor was really like, he heard a door slam, and felt himself pushed along what seemed to be the hallway of a house. His eyes were clear now, and he could see, but the darkness had come down again so thickly that all he could discover was that the figure was urging him along the floor of a large empty hall, and that they were in a dark and empty building. Jimbo tried hard to see his captor, but the figure, dim enough in the uncertain light, always managed to hide its face and keep itself bunched up in such a way that he could never see more than a great dark mass of a body from which long legs and arms shot out like telescopes, draped in a sort of clinging cloak. Now that the rapid motion through the air had ceased, the boy's drowsiness passed a little, and he began to shiver with fear, and to fear that the tears could not be kept back much longer. Probably in another minute he would have started to run for his life, when a new sound caught his ears and made him listen intently, while a feeling of wonder and delight caught his heart, and made him momentarily forget the figure pushing him forward from behind. Was it the wind he heard? Or was it the voices of children all singing together, very low? It was a gentle sighing sound that rose and fell with mournful modulations, and seemed to come from the very centre of the building. It held, too, a strange far-away murmur, like the surge of a faint breeze moving in the tree-tops. It might be the wind playing round the walls of the building, or it might be children singing in hushed voices. One minute he thought it was outside the house, and the next he was certain it came from somewhere in the upper part of the building. He glanced up, and fancied for one moment that he saw in the darkness a crowd of little faces peering down at him over the banisters, and that as they disappeared he heard the sound of many little feet moving, and then a door hurriedly closing. But a push from the figure behind that nearly sent him sprawling on the foot of the stairs prevented his hearing very clearly, and the light was far too dim to let him feel sure of what he had seen. They passed quickly along deserted corridors and through winding passages. No one seemed about. The interior of the house was chilly, and the keen air nipped. After going up several flights of stairs they stopped at last in front of a door, and before Jimbo had a moment to turn and dash upstairs again past the figure, as he had meant to do, he was pushed violently forward into a room. The door slammed after